Today we're going to turn the Fujifilm X-T5 into a snapshot camera, almost like a point and shoot for super quick street action. The goal here is to minimize all of the settings that we need to change on the Fujifilm X-T5, as well as even autofocus. The less we have to change the settings or any of the dials on here on the camera, the more it becomes a snapshot camera. Kind of, I guess. So here are all of the settings that I've changed in order to simplify everything about this camera. The very first thing I change is to switch the ISO to auto. This way, whenever my left hand is holding the camera and the lens down at the bottom while changing the aperture, I don't have to switch up here and change the ISO all the time. And currently I have two different settings for auto ISO. The very first one, I have the sensitivity set to 125, the maximum sensitivity to 3200, whereas the minimum shutter speed is 160 of a second. I use this one whenever I know I have plenty of light. But if I'm going in and out from like a bright area to places where there's not enough light, I'll switch to the second one, whereas the default sensitivity is 125 and the maximum is 12,800. The minimum shutter speed stays the same at 1/60th of a second. And I've also changed the down arrow into a quick axis where I can change the auto ISO. And in order to really experience that snapshot camera feeling, I've also changed the shutter speed to full auto. And this makes me in like a aperture priority, where I only have to adjust my aperture. And if I really want to, I can also put that in auto and make it full auto, which will simplify the camera even further. And the next thing that I've simplified is the photometry. There are two modes that I use the most. One is spot and the other one is multi. I usually use multi if I'm in more of a fast-paced environment on the street. This allows the camera to decide what is the best exposure for the entire scene in your frame. And I will use spot metering whenever I really want to utilize the highlights and shadow in order to make my subject stand out. Because essentially what spot metering does is that it'll try to calculate the exposure of wherever the focus point is pointing at. And in order to achieve that, you want to make sure that the interlock spot auto exposure and focus area is turned on, or else the spot metering will only auto expose for the center of the frame. So here's a trick that I found after playing around with the customizable buttons, and I have set this top nameless button, which is also known as function 1, to something called recall custom 1 setting. So now instead of setting it to photometry where you can access to all 4 kinds of meterings, I only need really 2, at least for my shooting styles. It might be different for you, so definitely play around with that and see which one you like most. So essentially what I did here is that on customize 1 I have spot metering, and usually I'll keep myself in like customize 2 or 3 or 4, and so one would be spot metering and the other one would be multi. So in this case, all I have to do is to press this button and it'll switch between multi and spot right away. This saves me the time to go inside photometry and switch between different metering. Do keep in mind that you can only recall to customize 1 settings, not all the other settings that you have customized in here, but it will memorize where you came from. So for example, if I'm in like C3, it'll jump back to C1, and then press again, it'll jump back to C3. Now here comes the bread and butter that truly simplifies the shooting experience with the Fujifilm X-T5 and pretty much all the other Fujifilm cameras. That is to use focus range limiter, which makes taking street photography a lot faster and easier in my opinion, because we're not fully relying on autofocus. Well, we kind of are, but let me explain. Basically, when we're using the focus range limiter, we are limiting the focus distance of the autofocus within a certain range. So this way, the camera is not always trying to focus to infinity all the time. As you can probably imagine already, the smaller the range is, the faster the camera can autofocus between that range. And the reason why this works really well with street photography is because it mitigates the chance of the camera trying to focus hunt. And it is is way easier and faster to acquire focus on a subject at a predictable distance. On top of that, shooting through windows and reflections on the street takes less time and it's a lot accurate with this as well. So let me walk you through how I set up the focus range limiter. First of all, you'll have to turn off the face eye detection in order to have this function to be even available. Now inside focus range limiter, you can set from point A to point B. Simply adjust the first distance, which is point A. Then you want to go to point B. Once you know your range, you can set it by not pressing OK, but you want to press back. And now you're set to go. I also like to shoot this in autofocus continuous with wide tracking. Honestly, you can shoot it in whichever mode you like best that suits your shooting styles. Definitely go and test this out and see which one you like more, as well as the kind of distance that you like to set to whenever you're on the street. The more photos you take, the easier it is for you to gauge the distance between you and the subject. And this really simplifies the shooting experience. One thing you do have to keep in mind is to turn off the focus range limiter whenever you don't need it, whenever you're not shooting street photography, because it simply won't show on the screen or the LCD screen to tell you that you have focus range limiter on. So what I did here is to set this function button right in the front of the camera to focus range limiter. This way I can turn it on whenever I need to, like really quickly, or simply turn it off and go back to manual mode and enjoy my shoot. So far, I feel like the only downside to this is that we only get one customizable range, and the other two is presets that we can't change. But hopefully Fujifilm will add more in the future. The next thing I'll change in the setting is to turn off the pre-autofocus. Basically what it does is that it'll keep on trying to autofocus on things whenever you're not tilting the camera to focus. I believe this is on by default, but if you want to save battery, I'll definitely turn this off. Another reason why I keep this function off all the time is because it gets in the way while shooting. There will be times where I'm trying to focus on something, but if I'm changing or adjusting like the camera settings, where I tilt the camera for a little bit, and somehow if there's different obstacles in front of the focus point, it'll try to focus on that because it keeps on trying to focus on anything that's in front of it. So whenever I'm done with the settings and I point back the camera to my subject, it'll try to focus again because essentially it's trying to focus on two different things. So in this case, I'd rather just have to focus on the subject that I want to take already, instead of having the camera trying to focus on anything that's in front of the focus point. And yes, the focus is relatively quick nowadays, especially with the X-T5, but whenever you're doing street photography, focus, it's quite crucial because things are often moving in a very fast pace and you only have a split second to capture it. And again, most of these settings that you can do on pretty much any other Fujifilm cameras. So definitely go try out and have fun with the range limiter. It's actually really easy to play with. And I'm sure you'll be surprised how fast it is to get the focus right once you get the range right. If you like Fujifilm videos like this, definitely check this one out next. With that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. A little too far this time.